Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Here to wish you a very happy Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. And this week, in honor of the holiday, speaking of the holiday, wherever you are around the world today, I hope you are having a lovely one.
Yeah, we were until you showed up.
Really? Mm-hmm. Even on Christmas, huh? Just can't give me a break. I guess I kind of walked into that one. I'll give you that. Anyway, this week, in honor of the holiday, I thought it would be fun to talk a little bit, fantasize, if you will, about which collectible items throughout the history of Morrissey's career, both solo and the Smiths, would you most love to find underneath your Christmas tree? Well, I guess earlier today, or perhaps next year. It's never too early, is it? But what are those items throughout Morrissey's career or the Smiths' career? Certain items, certain possessions that would mean the most to you to have. I've considered this over the past week. I know what you're thinking.
This is totally ridiculous. I'm leaving.
Well, it's no more ridiculous, really, than a man in his 40s having a weekly show where he slobbers all over his favorite music artist. So just sit down! Anyway, I thought it'd be a fun topic for the holiday. So this should be a relatively brief and painless episode. We'll get in and we'll get out in a relatively short period of time. Now, for me, as far as I'm concerned, Christmas is something that, or the holiday, however you want to put it, is something that over the years, especially in my adult years, has been something, for the most part, I could sort of take or leave. As a kid, of course, I loved Christmas. It was something I always got really excited about. I guess sometimes as a kid, you kind of don't realize how messed up your family is until Christmas comes around. It gives you a good reminder that things aren't always going to go as copacetic as it would appear on Christmas specials on television. I do remember as a kid a few of my favorite Christmas presents growing up. I think my favorite Christmas present I ever got as a kid was when I got my first Millennium Falcon. I was a big Star Wars fan when I was a kid. Now, as an adult, I've kind of gotten to where I'm not really big into Star Wars. I guess I like the original trilogy, okay. But apart from everything after that, I kind of lost interest a long time ago. Another one of my favorite Christmas presents I got as a kid, it may have been the year right after that, the Millennium Falcon Christmas, I was a huge He-Man guy. I still am. I still collect toys, and I still love all the old He-Man figures. He-Man was probably my favorite toy series when I was a kid. And I remember the year I got Castle Grayskull was a year that was completely life-altering as far as I was concerned. However, I was a little bit jealous because that same year my brother got Snake Mountain. And if you're old enough to remember, Snake Mountain came with a microphone, which when you spoke into it, created this menacing, echoey kind of sound, this sort of cavernous sound that was supposed to sound like Snake Mountain. I was a little bit jealous of that, even though I wanted Castle Grayskull. I do remember also one Christmas as a kid, I got my first ever music that I ever owned. It was on cassette at the time. I think I was 5 or 6, maybe 7 years old. My parents got me this little, kind of this little cute little boom box and a couple of cassettes to go with it. I remember the first cassette I ever owned was Michael Jackson Thriller. And the second cassette I owned, it was the same day. Basically, I opened them both on Christmas morning. But the second album I ever owned was by Weird Al. I believe it was his self-titled record because it was the record that had another one, Rides the Bus or whatever it was on it. I remember later that night, we had these neighbors when I was a kid. They weren't my grandparents. but they were neighbors that we called Grandma and Grandpa, and they came over. And they sort of adopted my brother and sister and I as their adoptive grandkids. And they brought us each a present, and they brought me, my parents must have told them I was getting something music related. So they brought me a cassette tape of the best of Red Soul Vine, who I don't know if you know who that is or not, but he's this old sort of a trucker country singer who sang these really morbid songs about truck drivers dying on the road. And all these like horrific lyrics. My parents, I think, were a little bit confused by the music on the cassette that they'd given me. I didn't particularly like it anyway, but I was really into that Michael Jackson Thriller tape. And Weird Al was probably, as a little kid, was probably my first ever real favorite recording artist. As far as being an adult, in my younger adult years, I've sort of kind of been, indifferent about Christmas. There were many years I could have just taken it or leaving it. But over the past 11 or 12 years, whatever it's been since I've been with my wife, she has really gotten me into being more into the Christmas spirit. She is somebody who loves Christmas. She is somebody who is very fun to shop for. She's got a lot of cool, kind of weird interests. She gets really excited when you find her something that she likes. Now, all that being said, this year my wife and I are sort of taking the year off for Christmas shopping because we do have some travel plans coming up in January right after the holidays. As all of you Morrissey fans know, we're going out to, a lot of us will be going out to Southern California for the You Are the Quarry shows. That is on our itinerary for January. So instead of buying a bunch of gifts, as you can see around me, I have plenty of material possessions. We've decided to go out and see Morrissey in Southern California, possibly hit up Disney, and perhaps hang out a little bit down in Los Angeles also. I love going to Hollywood Boulevard. I love going to Amoeba, the Rainbow, Whiskey, stuff like that. So I would say this year, Christmas has kind of like passed me by. I can't actually believe that we are here. This entire year, 2023, I know the older you get, the more cliche it sounds, but this year just like blew by me. I can't even, honestly, it still feels like June as far as I'm concerned. So this Christmas, this whole year, kind of got away from me. I have a job I've mentioned on this channel in the past. I have a job where I work with the public. So sometimes working, with the public around this time of year can sometimes take a little bit of the piss out of you. That's kind of how I felt this year. This year's kind of gotten by me. I haven't been like ultra in the spirit like we normally are. But that being said, let's get into this list a little bit so we can get out of here and all enjoy the time we have with our family. Now, I came up with 10 sort of Morrissey/Smith collectible items that I would most cherish. Some of these, it ranges from some of these being relatively attainable to some of these being completely fantasy-based, but I guess that's kind of the fun in all of this. So what are some items as a hardcore Morrissey fan that you would love to have in your personal collection? For me, the 10th one I chose is something I think is really very attainable if I were to go out and really look for it, and that would be an original pressing of the first single, Hand in Glove. I really would like to have this piece for its historical significance. Now, I think I've mentioned in the past that Hand in Glove isn't necessarily my favorite song of the Smiths ever, but if I could find an original pressing of that first single, just to have that for its historical significance would mean a lot to me. There are some things on this list that are completely unattainable, so this is probably the most realistic as far as my list is concerned. The one I put after that, for me, number 9, would be one of the pearl sort of grandma necklaces that Morrissey is wearing during the band's Top of the Pops debut in 1983. Not only because I loved that aesthetic when Morrissey would wear the sort of grandma pearl necklaces. I actually went through a phase back in my early 20s when I did the same thing. I used to go to thrift stores and I would buy a bunch of those tacky sort of grandma big, plastic pearl necklaces. It's a look I probably could not pull off at my age now, but at the time I thought I looked pretty snug. But it was an aesthetic that I sort of stole from both Morrissey and Billy Idol. At the time, I would say that Generation X was probably my favorite band of all time at that point in time. So you could either, I guess, credit or blame, more accurately, Morrissey or Billy Idol for my grandma pearl necklace phase. But I always thought it'd be cool to have one of the ones that Morrissey wore on Top of the Pops for their debut in 1983, just because it was the band's debut on it. It is such an iconic. It was such an iconic TV show. It might still be. I never get tired of going back and looking at old Top of the Pops performances on YouTube of all kinds of bands. I thought that show was just like really cool, especially as an American. It just looks so cool. If you go back, they always had such great bands on there, especially back in those days. For me, number 8 now would be probably something that is very unrealistic, possibly even more unrealistic than the pearl necklace, and that would be to have a handwritten set list from the final Smiths show at Brixton Academy, December 12th, 1986. The show with Pete Shelley, the band's last ever live performance. Just to have something from that show would be, anything really would be acceptable, but my dream, if you are not limiting yourself to anything grounded in reality, my dream would be to have one of the handwritten set lists. It's really unfortunate, as I've said before, I never got a chance to see the Smiths live. So anything from that Queen is Dead tour would be acceptable. Dream set list would be the final one at Brixton Academy. Number 7 for me would be something that is completely outrageous. And that would be the bass used to record Barbarism Begins at Home on the Smiths' Meat is Murder album. 1, because Andy Rourke is my favorite bassist of all time. And 2, because that is probably my favorite bass line in the history of the Smiths catalog. And of course, 3, sadly, Andy Rourke passed away this past year, 2023. I'm not asking, I don't necessarily need the whole bass. If you would just be willing to give me a string off of that bass, something that recorded the Barbarism Begins at Home track from the Meat is Murder record, that to me is Andy Rourke's most shining moment during the Smiths catalog. And I think, as I've said, I think Andy Rourke is one of the greatest bass players of all time. I know you say that to the wrong person, you're going to get the snicker and the side eye. But I don't really care. So if somebody would like to send me the bass, or just a string off of it, or maybe the pick, honestly, I'm not asking for the world here, off of Barbarism Begins at Home, I would happily take that. The next one, number 6, is another set list. This one would be the set list from my first ever personal Morrissey show, 1997 at the Warfield in San Francisco. Very important night in my music fandom career. I think I've mentioned this story in the past. My friend and I got to San Francisco early that day. We were going to go see Morrissey play at the Warfield on the Maladjusted tour. He and I were at the Tower Records in San Francisco, which used to be right in the city, and we overheard 2 people talking about how they'd gone to see Morrissey the night before, and I fell into an utter panic. I had no idea at the time he was playing 2 nights at the Warfield in San Francisco. So my friend and I just booked it downtown as quickly as we could. We found out that he was playing that night. He was playing 2 shows. And I guess the bright side of it is that we got to the show so early that we were on the floor in the standing area. We actually ended up being super close to the stage, having really good view. Now, it wasn't necessarily the greatest show I've ever seen of Morrissey. That night, he seemed to be like he was in okay spirits. It wasn't like he was being, cranky Morrissey, but it definitely was not the best show I've ever seen of his. But if I could have a handwritten set list from that night, just because of the sentimental attachment, if nothing else. After that, number 5 would be from the movie Pretty in Pink. If you remember the scenes in the record store Trax, the record store that was owned by Annie Potts. If you go through the back door into the employee area, the break room, there was a Smiths poster on that door. So my number 5 dream Smiths piece of memorabilia would be that poster from that movie set, from that record store, in Pretty in Pink. It's just something that I've always... I remember seeing it after I discovered who the Smiths were. I remember seeing it and finally recognizing who that band was. There's also, if I can't have the poster, there's another part of that scene where, Andy McCarthy... there's another scene in the record store, I should say, where Andrew McCarthy and he's over there and he's kind of, flipping through records, and his friend Steph comes over and they're discussing some sort of plans they have of the day. Of course, Steph, played by James Spader, who is one of my favorite actors of all time, where they're standing having a conversation. If you look in the foreground, there's one of those record dividers that says the Smiths on it. So if I can't have the poster from the door featuring the band, I would happily take that record divider. Also, one of the greatest movies, in my opinion, ever made. James Spader is one of my favorite actors of all time. Not that this is like an unknown fact, but an interesting fact about the scenes filmed in the record store Trax, which even as a kid I thought was the coolest record store ever. Was the kid in that scene, or the scene where he gets caught shoplifting, or trying to shoplift, and Annie Potts shoots him in the face with a staple. That kid is the singer from the Aquabats MC Bat Commander. You probably already knew that. I'm just sorry. For me, number 4 would be another one that was probably out of reach. But it would be Morrissey's Gold LeMay shirt that he wore in the Glamorous Glue video. But I think more famously, it was the shirt that he wore on Saturday Night Live. Looking back on it, it's sort of interesting or funny, I guess you could say, to think of Morrissey being on Saturday Night Live. I don't know why it always strikes me as being humorous that he was ever on Saturday Night Live. I mean, a lot of big artists have been on Saturday Night Live, but there's something about him particularly on Saturday Night Live. And I know he's done a bunch of the big late night shows. I don't know what it is, but to me, the fact that he appeared on Saturday Night Live has always kind of been funny to me. But I want the Gold LeMay shirt, Steve, so I will email you my address, okay? Have it nicely gift wrapped also, if you don't mind. For me, number 3 is pretty basic. This is something that, again, it's probably all fantasy based. I mean, this whole Morrissey Monday is fantasy based, isn't it? But for me, it would be basically any piece of equipment ever used in the recording of any Smiths track in any studio ever. I'm not asking for a guitar. I'm not asking for a drum kit. I'm not asking for a microphone. Anything will do. A guitar string, a drum stool, drum stool would be pretty cool, actually. Guitar pick, anything that was used in the recording of any Smiths album in the studio is something that I would probably kill for. Anything, like I said, I'm not really that picky, so it doesn't have to be a big item. Number 2 for me would be kind of in the same vein a little bit, but I would say anything from the stage at the Wolverhampton 88 show. Again, I'm not necessarily asking for a guitar or an amp or a drum, a cymbal or anything like that. It could be one of the set lists. It could be a flower off the stage. Anything from Wolverhampton 88. To me, that is the single most important moment in Morrissey's solo career. If I had a musical time machine where I could go back and sort of revisit maybe 5 Morrissey or Smiths related moments in history, that would be my number one. Just to be in that room with that energy, that excitement. Yeah, it was a brief show, and it wasn't necessarily like the greatest performance of all time, but just to be there would be unbelievable. So I would be willing to take anything off of that stage. Like I said, give me like one flower petal. I'm not asking for the world. I just want one tiny little piece of anything that touched that stage at Wolverhampton in '88. Like I said, to me, that is the single most important moment in Morrissey's solo career. If I had a time machine, that's where you'll find me. For me, number one, this is probably my dream Morrissey item. Pretty simple for me, really. This was the easiest one to choose. That would be the original, if it exists. This may not even exist anymore, or may never have existed, period. Maybe he didn't write it this way, but if I could ever get my hands on the original handwritten lyrics to the song Every Day is Like Sunday, I would be willing to walk down to my local morgue and slide myself into one of the drawers right now. To me, that is the greatest song of all time. It will probably always be my favorite song. And if it is out there anywhere, the original handwritten lyrics as Morrissey was working on that song, that is something that I would probably quite literally die for. To me, it's my favorite song of all time. It's probably always been my favorite Morrissey song, but it was the song that really solidified my fandom. It's an ultimate sentimental favorite. So that would be my number one, the original handwritten lyrics to Every Day is Like Sunday. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. I realize it was a little bit ridiculous this week, but we're all enjoying the holiday. Nobody's watching this crap anyway. Anyway, man, like I said, thank you so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check back every week for Morrissey Monday. Weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. Most of the topics on this show aren't quite as nonsensical. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Be sure to check back every week, as I mentioned, for Morrissey Monday, as well as other record content throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, have a great holiday, and I will talk to you then.